Welcome to Whispers of Crime. Tonight, we're looking at a case that has, for over 60 years, refused to rest. It's a story of a horrific crime, a swift execution, and decades of lingering, profound doubt. It begins on a dark night in the English countryside.
August 26, 1961. Two lovers ambushed at gunpoint in a cornfield near Maidenhead. They were forced to drive for 6 hours through the night. This wasn't a quick crime. It was a terrifying, sustained ordeal. Their destination, a place called Deadman's Hill on the A6 road. There, a scientist, Michael Gregsten, was shot twice in the head, murdered. His companion, Valerie Storie, was then raped, shot 5 times, and left paralyzed for life. The killer just vanished into the darkness.
An absolutely brutal crime, and the manhunt must have been immense.
It was immediate, and it was intense, and it eventually zeroed in on one man, James Hanratty. He was 25, a petty thief, really with no history of violence. He was arrested on October 11, 1961. His trial lasted 21 days. He was hanged on April 4, 1962. And his last words, whispered to the prison priests, were, "I'm dying tomorrow, but I'm innocent. Clear my name."
Hanged. But with such a strong final claim of innocence, what was the case against him built on?
Well, that's where the problems begin. The official case, you see, it rested on shaky ground. There was almost no forensic evidence at the time linking him directly to the scene. And he fatally undermined his own defense. He changed his alibi mid-trial from Liverpool to Rhyl in Wales. The jury, you can imagine, faced with all this contradictory evidence, they deliberated for 9 hours before they returned a unanimous guilty verdict.
But the doubts didn't start years later. They were there from the beginning.
Almost from the start, yes. A shadow fell across the verdict. The initial suspect was a man named Peter Alphon, an eccentric drifter, the son of a Scotland Yard official, interestingly. After the murder, he locked himself in a hotel room for 5 days. Valerie Storie, the sole surviving victim, she failed to identify him in a lineup, so he was released. But the questions, they just persisted. In 1967, Alphon actually confessed on tape to a journalist, Jean Justice. He claimed he was paid £5,000 to end the affair. Then he withdrew the confession.
So you have a confession from another man and a key witness who is a convicted fraudster.
Exactly. The hotel manager at the center of the investigation, William Nuds, was a convicted fraudster who changed his statement 3 times. And the physical evidence was, well, it was geographically paradoxical. The murder weapon was found wrapped in a handkerchief on the 36A bus route, and cartridges from the exact same gun were discovered in a basement room at the Vienna Hotel, which, sat right on that same bus route.
And then decades later, science intervenes.
Yes. In 2002, DNA evidence from Hanratty's exhumed body led the Court of Appeal to rule him guilty beyond doubt. But his family claims the evidence, 40 years old by that point, was contaminated during police handling.
So, was an innocent man hanged? Or was this a guilty murderer whose case became folklore, forever shadowing the British criminal justice system? The A6 murder is not just a crime story, it's really a textbook case of legal and investigative controversy, and we are here to analyze the source material, the police reports, trial transcripts, the official findings, to understand why this case refuses to be settled. And we have to remember that at the heart of this entire legal tempest are 2 people, Michael Gregsten, who lost his life, and Valerie Storie, whose life was brutally and permanently altered. Before we move on, if this kind of exploration of historical justice failures is something you value, please follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Okay, let's begin where the police did, with the sole surviving witness, Valerie Storie. The 6-hour ordeal, just so unusual. What did that lengthy exposure reveal about the man who held them at gunpoint?
The duration of the abduction, it's a real double-edged sword for any prosecution. On one hand, it gave Valerie Storie a huge amount of time to absorb crucial details about her attacker. I mean, that would usually be considered high-value evidence.
Right, much more time than in a quick, violent encounter.
Exactly. But on the other hand, you have to consider memory under that kind of extreme, prolonged stress is just notoriously unreliable. And the pressure of the investigation afterwards, well, it could easily warp those recollections.
So what were the key details she did absorb, the ones that stuck?
She gave some very significant behavioral and vocal clues. The attacker spoke with a very, very pronounced Cockney accent. But the most specific detail was a distinct speech pattern. He had difficulty pronouncing the English 3 sound. He consistently rendered it as an F.
So he would say things instead of things.
Precisely. Things instead of things, and think instead of think.
That's a highly specific piece of linguistic evidence. It suggests a deeply ingrained speech habit, not something you could easily fake or, misremember.
Exactly. For the police, this became a crucial identifier. It helped them narrow down the initial pool of suspects. And beyond that, the gunman spent those 6 hours basically crafting a narrative about himself. He claimed to be on the run for 4 months. He mentioned he'd never owned a gun before. He said he'd been sleeping outdoors without proper food. It painted a picture of a desperate, maybe lower-level criminal who was new to this level of violence.
Okay, so we have a profile emerging, a Cockney accent, a specific speech impediment, maybe a nonviolent background, and as Storie noted, he was a bad driver. How did the police try to capture what he looked like?
Well, Storie worked with the police, and importantly, so did a witness named Edward Blackhall, who'd seen the driver of the stolen car earlier. Together, they compiled an identikit picture, which was the best technology available back in 1961.
But that didn't hold up, did it?
No. The reliability of this visual ID, it just eroded very quickly. Only 2 days after the crime, Valerie Storie gave a substantially different description of her assailant to the police. And that raised the first major inconsistency in the case.
Let's pivot to the figure who really dominated the investigation at the start, Peter Alphon, an eccentric drifter with this strange connection to Scotland Yard through his father. What drew the police to him so fast?
Alphon became a figure of intense suspicion, partly because of his proximity to the area, but also because of his utterly bizarre, self-incriminating actions. A key moment came on September 7th, just weeks after the A6 murder. A woman named Mike Delal was attacked in her home in Richmond, and the attacker, who she later identified as Alphon, said to her chillingly that he was the A6 murderer.
Why would someone do that? Why claim responsibility for a massive murder case while committing another crime? Was he just an attention seeker?
It's hard to say. I mean, it's very hard to get inside that mindset, but it certainly drew the police spotlight right onto him. Alphon was picked up, and Valerie Storie was asked to participate in an identity parade.
And
She failed to identify him as the gunman.
so that cleared him.
Well, it temporarily cleared him, yes. It has shifted the police focus. But the physical evidence, it created this unavoidable geographic link that kept tying the case back to Alphon and the area he frequented.
Okay, so tell me about that link. The hotel.
On September 11th, cartridge cases matching the murder weapon were found. They were discovered in a basement guest bedroom, room 24, at the Vienna Hotel in Maida Vale, London. And crucially, the murder weapon itself, a .38 Webley, had been found wrapped in a handkerchief and just dumped on the 36A bus route, a route which ran directly past the Vienna Hotel.
This hotel becomes the absolute nexus of the case then. The weapon on the bus route, the cartridges in a hotel right on that same route. What was Alphon's connection to the Vienna?
Alphon claimed he was at the hotel, specifically in room 6, on the night of the murder. And he also claimed he remained locked in that room for 5 days afterwards.
5 days. That's odd behavior.
It's extremely odd behavior. It certainly speaks to either extreme fear or some kind of profound distress. He claimed it was due to a personal crisis, totally unrelated to the murder. The fact that the physical evidence was found in room 24, not his room 6, introduced immediate ambiguity.
And this ambiguity leads us straight to the critical weak link in the entire prosecution. The hotel manager, William Nuds, we know he was a convicted fraudster. When your star witness has known integrity issues, the system should treat their testimony with extreme caution. But Nuds didn't just have an integrity issue, he actually introduced chaos into the investigation.
The damage Nuds did to the integrity of this case is almost immeasurable. He was, by his own admission in court, a liar. He gave 3 separate statements to the police, and his story, well, it shifted directly to mirror the police's changing focus, away from Alphon and towards Hanratty.
Walk me through those shifts in his account. How did he move the pieces to implicate Ryan, which was Hanratty's alias?
Okay, so initially, when the cartridges were found in room 24, Nuds told police the last occupant of that room was a man named James Ryan. That's Hanratty. However, his first 2 statements, which he later retracted, actually contained details that could have strongly incriminated Alphon.
And then the police focus on Hanratty.
Exactly. And Nuds' third statement becomes the linchpin of the case against him. First, he complicated the whole room issue. He retracted his initial story that Ryan was in room 24. Instead, he claimed Alphon had actually been in the basement room 24 and Ryan had been in room 6.
Right.
But that the 2 men had swapped rooms during the night.
Swap rooms? For what reason? That sounds completely convoluted.
It sounds like an attempt to retrofit the evidence to the new suspect. But the most damning change involves the bus route.
Ah, yes. The bus route.
It's a subtle but absolutely critical detail. It points directly towards evidence manipulation. In Nuds' early statements, he mentioned Ryan asking for directions to the General 36 bus stop, a common local route. In his final third statement, the one used at trial, Nuds got very specific. He claimed Ryan had asked for directions to the 36A bus.
The exact route where the murder weapon was found.
The exact route.
So what does that mean for an investigation? When your crucial witness, a known fraudster, changes their story 3 times, specifically adjusting a tiny detail like a bus route number to make sure the new suspect aligns perfectly with the evidence.
It suggests an alarming case of tunnel vision. The investigation, under immense pressure to solve this horrific high-profile case, it appears to have shifted. It went from seeking the truth to, well, seeking confirmation for their favorite suspect, Hanratty. The shift from 36 to the specific 36A bus route is a textbook example of evidence tailoring. It gives the appearance of certainty that Hanratty knew exactly where he was going to dispose of the weapon, but the only person providing this critical detail was a proven liar who had already shifted his story twice.
So this initial phase, it just sets a dangerous precedent. The physical evidence, the weapon, the cartridges, it's fantastic evidence. But its connection to the defendant is entirely channeled through a demonstrably unreliable source. It's a fault line in the foundation of the whole case. Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also, comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating. Despite this shaky foundation, the prosecution successfully brought James Hanratty to trial in 1962. We know he was a petty criminal, but let's talk about the full contrast between the man they arrested and the killer described by Valerie Storie.
Hanratty was 25. He had a clear criminal record. Yes, 4 convictions for larceny and car theft. He used the alias James Ryan. But the stark inconsistency, as we noted, was his history. The killer claimed to be desperate, new to gun violence. Hanratty had no convictions for violence whatsoever, and no evidence he'd ever even possessed a firearm, though he did admit trying to get one earlier that year.
And the driving? That's a big contradiction.
A huge contradiction. Hanratty was an experienced car thief. He knew how to drive well, how to drive quickly. Valerie Storie was explicit. She told police the murderer drove badly, stalled the car repeatedly, handled it like a complete amateur. This mismatch, an experienced car thief versus an unskilled driver, is one of the main points cited by those who dispute the conviction.
So if the profile was wrong and the visual ID was shaky, where did the solid evidence come from? What was the linchpin that convinced that jury?
The evidence was circumstantial, and it relied heavily on 2 things: the Cockney connection and the victim's ultimate identification. The prosecution made enormous use of that specific speech defect. Hanratty, while he was on the run, made a series of panicked but strangely cooperative phone calls to Scotland Yard. And in those calls, he repeatedly pronounced think as fink. This phonetic flaw, the difficulty with the af sound, it exactly matched Storie's description of the killer.
That detail is chillingly specific. It's a direct auditory link between Hanratty and the man Valerie Storie spent 6 hours with.
It was a critical, high-impact piece of evidence.
Yeah.
Added to this was the forensic evidence, though it was primitive by our standards today. His blood group was O, which matched the blood group found at the scene. But again, this is a common blood type.
Right. 36% of the population.
Shared by 36% of the population, including the other main suspect, Peter Alphon. At the time of the trial, there was simply no way to conclusively tie Hanratty to the car or the scene beyond that auditory match and Storie's eventually very firm identification.
But the truly defining, catastrophic moment for Hanratty was the destruction of his own defense, the constantly changing alibis.
Right. When the prosecution's case is based on a few fleeting identifications, the defense's only rock is a credible alibi. And the identification evidence was fragile. The prosecution used 3 IDs, all for very short periods of time. The defense, on the other hand, could point to leading Crown witnesses who failed to identify Hanratty on 5 separate occasions. So the case was finally balanced. Hanratty unfortunately destroyed that balance himself.
He started with Liverpool.
He first claimed he was in Liverpool on the night of the murder. This was quickly and definitively disproven by investigators. And that just established him as a proven liar to the court from the outset.
And then he shifted his alibi mid-trial, which has to be the most damning strategic mistake a defendant can make.
It was devastating. Halfway through the proceedings, his defense team introduced a new alibi. He'd been in Rhyl, North Wales, during the relevant week. The jury's natural reaction must have been, well, why should we believe this one when the first one was a lie?
But the extraordinary twist here is that the Rhyl alibi, it seems, was actually verifiable. How robust were the details from the witnesses in North Wales?
They were surprisingly concrete. Hanratty's defense produced a landlady, a Mrs. Grace Jones, who testified that he stayed at her Ingledene guest house in Rill, and she supported her memory with highly specific, verifiable details that would be very hard to just invent months later. She recalled the tiled yard of the property, the persistent sound of trains shunting nearby, and even this unique detail of a green bath in the attic room where Hanratty stayed.
And she wasn't the only one. There was corroboration.
Yes, her testimony was corroborated by a local poultry keeper named Trevor Dutton. He recalled seeing Hanratty on August 23rd, the day after the murder. And Dutton was able to confirm this sighting because his bank records confirmed he was in that exact area on that very day. The alibi was location-specific, time-specific, and independently corroborated. If Hanratty had just told the truth from the start, well, the outcome might have been very different.
This is the tragic irony of the case, isn't it? A potentially innocent man holding the keys to his own freedom with a credible alibi panics and undermines his whole defense. And this leads us to the context the jury never got. Why did he lie?
This is where the human tragedy deepens. Hanratty had a significant but concealed medical history. He had undergone a serious brain operation as a teenager after an accident. And accounts from people who knew him suggest that after this procedure, his character just deteriorated sharply. He went from being an honest boy to a thief, and from a truthful person to a persistent liar. The theory is that Hanratty, being a low-intelligence individual with a criminal record, was paralyzed by fear. He believed the police would never accept the truth. So he constructed a false alibi out of panic, and when that failed, he constructed another, devastating his credibility in front of the jury.
It just illuminates a profound flaw in the adversarial justice system. It struggles when it deals with vulnerable or intellectually impaired defendants who actively work against their own defense. And his defense team couldn't really use his mental history, could they? It would have conflicted with a not guilty plea.
That's the consensus. It might have led to a reduced charge of manslaughter, but it would have meant admitting he was a proven liar. A terrible dilemma. So the jury, unaware of his mental frailty, they saw only a guilty man trying to evade justice through deceit.
And so the verdict came in?
Ultimately, yes. The combination of Storie's identification, the auditory link of the speech, the ambiguous physical evidence, and the disastrous collapse of his alibi proved fatal.
The jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict. The Home Secretary at the time confirmed the decision that the law should take its course, but only after, in his words, the most anxious and thorough course of inquiry. The state was convinced.
But the doubts persisted right up to the end. They did. And it was because of Hanratty's final act. He refused to confess, even to the priests who would offer him spiritual absolution. A confession in that sacred context could never have been revealed. He went to the gallows, preferring to die a Roman Catholic protesting his innocence to his last breath. For those who doubted his guilt, this was the most striking argument for his innocence.
The moment Hanratty was executed, the case really shifted. It became a campaign for justice. His brother, Michael Hanratty, spent the next 4 decades of his life campaigning to clear his name. And this movement wasn't marginal, was it? It attracted serious political and media firepower.
It truly became a cause célèbre for opponents of capital punishment and for champions of investigative journalism. Figures like Richard Ingrams, the editor of Private Eye, and Paul Foote, the famed investigative journalist, they threw their support behind the Hanratty family. Their central argument was that the sheer accumulation of questionable evidence, Nuds' lies, the plausible real alibi, the initial suspicion of Alphon meant that conviction was demonstrably unsafe.
And this sustained pressure, it forced the government to act. This wasn't just speculation in the press.
That's absolutely right. The case was continually raised in Parliament. The Hansard debates from 63 and 66 show that the political class was aware public confidence in the justice system was severely damaged. And the government responded by initiating 3 official Home Office inquiries over the following decades. 3 separate high-level reviews. Nimmo in 1967, Hauser in 1975, and Matthews in 1996. The fact that 3 were needed over 30 years just underscores how deep and enduring the legal doubt really was.
And while all this was happening, the alternative suspect, Peter Alphon, he continued this strange dance around the edges of the case, culminating in direct confessions.
This is the most surreal part of the story. It involves what was almost a private investigation run parallel to the official inquiries. A businessman, Jean Justice, and a barrister, Jeremy Fox, that cultivated Alphon, referring to him in their notes as Mr. X. And Alphon, well, apparently seeking to clear his conscience, or maybe gain some kind of perverse notoriety, provided a detailed confession to justice.
What was the specific narrative Alphon presented, especially concerning the physical evidence?
He claimed he was the killer. And he provided a story that directly addressed the physical evidence paradox. He stated explicitly that he had planted the cartridge cases in room 24 of the Vienna Hotel when Hanratty was temporarily absent. He called this narrative, chillingly, the frame-up in Vienna.
A frame-up, so that would explain how the cartridges got there.
If true, yes. But Alphon's personality soon betrayed him. When he realized justice was actively investigating him and passing info to the authorities, he became threatening. He began demanding money, threatening Justice's life. There are recorded phone calls that confirm this highly volatile, threatening stage.
The timing of Justice's reaction is just astounding. On the eve of Hanratty's execution, he tried a desperate gambit.
It was a moment of incredible, almost cinematic drama. Justice called the Home Office. He told them a dramatic development was about to occur at his flat, where the suspect Alphon was present. Police officers were dispatched immediately. They attended, but Justice. For reasons we'll never fully know, maybe fear, maybe a failure of nerve, he reported to the officers that he had nothing new to report to them.
So on the last night of Hanratty's life, the man who claimed to have framed him was in the same building as the man desperate to expose him with the police outside the door, and nothing happened. The final chance was lost.
Exactly. The finality of that failure is just haunting. And yet, even after the execution, Alphon maintained his narrative. In late 1968, he wrote directly to the Home Secretary, and he gave perhaps his clearest, most unambiguous admission. I killed Gregsten, the establishment murdered Hanratty, and has since acted against me as though they knew I was guilty.
How did the authorities reconcile these detailed, unambiguous confessions with the official narrative?
They largely dismissed them. The argument was that Alphon was fundamentally unstable, making confessions for publicity or financial gain. But that's complicated by one fact. When he was offered a prominent and potentially lucrative spot on the prestigious Frost program in 1967 to discuss his claims, he declined.
If it was about the spotlight, why turn down the brightest stage available?
Right. And he also exhibited behavior that seemed to reflect genuine resentment and guilt. He reportedly reacted with visible fear whenever Hanratty's real alibi got public attention, suggesting he feared it might be properly established and negate his whole frame-up story. It all culminated in 1962 when he physically attacked Mary Hanratty, Jones's mother, at Green Park. He was acquitted, but he made sure to mention his ignored A6 confession notes in court. His actions certainly suggested a deep psychological involvement in the case.
After 40 years of these inconclusive reviews, the case was inherited by the Criminal Cases Review Commission, the CCRC. This was the Hanratty family's last hope.
It was. And the CCRC's investigation immediately yielded a crucial finding. Their inquiries revealed that substantial new evidence had been available at the time of the 1962 trial, but was either not known or, critically, not made available to the defense team.
That finding alone, non-disclosure of crucial evidence, is damning in itself, isn't it? It means that even if Hanratty was guilty, the process by which he was convicted was fundamentally unfair.
Absolutely. The failure to disclose potentially exculpatory material is a systemic failure of justice. This confirmed what campaigners had suspected for decades. The initial investigation was flawed by tunnel vision and likely misconduct.
But the real game changer was the advancement in forensic science, DNA.
Yes, in a final, desperate attempt to either prove his guilt or establish his innocence, his body was exhumed. Scientists then tested two critical items of evidence that had been retained for 4 decades: the semen found on Valerie Storie's underwear and material from the handkerchief that was wrapped around the murder weapon.
The anticipation for those results must have been immense. What did they show?
The results were definitive. The DNA profiles from both the semen stain and the handkerchief material matched James Hanratty. This seemed to be the unequivocal scientific truth everyone had been waiting for. In 2002, the Court of Appeal reviewed all the findings. They concluded that the DNA was certain proof of Hanratty's guilt, declaring that 4 decades of controversy were finally over.
For many, the case was closed. But for the Hanratty family and their legal team, the DNA match just shifted the battleground. If the man was hanged after a flawed trial and the evidence stored for 40 years, the question becomes, is the DNA reliable? Or did the systemic flaws extend to the handling of the exhibits?
That became the central focus of the appeal defense, led by Sir Jeffrey Bindman. He argued that while DNA analysis is accurate, it's not infallible. The crucial issue is one of chain of custody and contamination, especially with what they call antique exhibits. Evidence that's been handled and stored under varying conditions by multiple police forces over 40 years.
Bindman's argument hinges on this question. Is the substance the DNA came from reliably linked to the moment of the crime? Or could Hanratty's DNA have been innocently transferred to the exhibits long after the crime?
Right. Could it have happened during the original police investigation? This point was heavily contested in court. Michael Hanratty confirmed that every scientist who was cross-examined had to concede that the evidence could have been cross-contaminated. Hanratty's belongings, his clothes, they would have been at the same police station where the original exhibits were first analyzed and stored.
And there's a powerful precedent for this fear of contamination in UK legal history.
Absolutely. The defense drew a parallel to the notorious McGuire 7 case, where contamination cast substantial doubt on scientific evidence and ultimately led to the quashing of those convictions. The argument was, if contamination could happen in a high-profile IRA case, it could easily happen to evidence stored from a brutal murder, especially when the original investigation was so demonstrably flawed.
It's a profound realization. The most definitive scientific proof available still can't fully answer the question of whether justice was done, because the original sentence, the death penalty, was carried out on a man convicted through a flawed and unfair legal process.
The tragedy is inherent in that finality. The DNA link is powerful, but it exists in a vacuum, separate from the documented historical failures. It leaves the doubt over the administration of justice to endure.
We stand now at this intersection of modern scientific certainty and historical legal failure. The official file is closed. Hanratty was the killer. But when you place the DNA evidence back into the full context of the case, the official conclusion still feels, well, profoundly unsettled.
The core conflict lies in weighing the overwhelming scientific probability of a DNA match against the totality of the systemic failures. We have to consider the documented police misconduct around William Nudd's 3 conflicting statements, especially that subtle but crucial shift from the 36 bus to the 36A. It suggests evidence tailoring. We have to factor in the CCRC's discovery of non-disclosure, which deprived Hanratty of a fair trial. These things all point to the severe risks of tunnel vision and immense pressure on investigators.
And then there is the critical human context. Hanratty's lying. The jury saw it as irrefutable evidence of guilt, but now we can see it through the prism of his low intelligence and unmentioned mental history. It transforms his deceit from malice into a tragic self-sabotage.
And, of course, the ever-present shadow of Peter Alphon. His documented, unambiguous confessions, including the frame-up in Vienna claim of obsessive behavior,
Right.
You can't just erase that. The authorities had his written confession, ignored it, and proceeded to hang the man Alphon claimed to have framed.
The combination of these factors, police ignoring alternatives, coerced statements, suppressed evidence, a verifiable alibi destroyed by the defendant's own frailty, it argues that the process that led to Hanratty's death was unsafe, regardless of whether the man they hanged was genetically linked to the crime scene.
And this is why the legal community always returns to this case, to illustrate the inherent dangers of an irrevocable sentence. Once the death penalty is carried out, the truth can never bring that person back.
As we conclude, it is essential we bring the focus back to the 2 people who truly suffered. We honor the memory of Michael Gregsten, who was murdered at Deadman's Hill, and we acknowledge the incredible strength and suffering of Valerie Storie.
Valerie Storie endured a brutal rape and 5 gunshot wounds, which left her paralyzed for life. She was the sole surviving witness, and her certainty, despite the multiple non-identifications she made, heavily influenced the original trial. Her horrific experience launched this enduring legal battle.
Her steadfast belief was a factor the 1962 jury just couldn't ignore.
The Hanratty case remains a crucial, painful reference point for miscarriages of justice in the UK. Even with the definitive power of modern DNA analysis, the historical context, the changed statements, the suppressed evidence, the counter-confessions, it ensures that the official conclusion of Hanratty's guilt will never fully resolve the profound questions about how justice was administered in 1962. It permanently scarred the British legal system.
The haunting tension between scientific fact and documented legal failure is the lasting legacy of the A6 murder. Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case, and also comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating. If you or someone you know believes you have information related to historical cases or miscarriages of justice, or if you simply wish to help support investigative work, you can find contact information and resources listed in our show description. Thank you for listening.